I'm about to put a higher level finish on this ceiling. This is about a 26 by 22 foot ceiling. So it's a large ceiling, it's very well lit, we have a lot of windows in here, so we get a lot of cross lighting. And I'm concerned about seeing little imperfections in this ceiling if I only apply the traditional level 4 ceiling finish. By that I mean embed the tape, put a fill coat over it, and then a finish coat, and then lightly sand. What I like to do is coat the entire ceiling to get rid of all these little differences. So to start out with, I'm going to quickly give it a sand, and then I'm going to move into actually applying the compound to create a level 5 finish. So I've sanded the ceiling. I've got a pretty good sanding job, but it definitely needs some touch-up. But I want to just point out what I mean by differences in the textures and porosities of the ceiling. And what I mean is, here we have a seam that I've taped. It's quite smooth, but it's also very porous compared to the regular drywall that hasn't been coated at all, or even sanded at all. So we got the seams and the screws, and then we have the areas where I've kind of roughed it up a little bit with the sandpaper. So I do have multiple porosities and multiple textures on this ceiling. Although they're very minimal, they will flash through a large ceiling when you get the right kind of light in here. And the goal here is to meet our customers' expectations. We don't want to end up saying, well, that's just what happens on a large ceiling. No, we want to prevent having that conversation. So I'm going to show you how easy it is to apply a thin layer compound that will correct all these little differences. What I do is I apply the compound to a workable area, like it'd probably be like an 8 foot by 3 foot area, because heat is on here, and I'm applying a relatively thin layer of joint compound, and I don't want it to start drying before I'm able to remove it, because if it does, it'll actually be creating a little bit of a texture. So what I've got here is I've got this ceiling taped with a lightweight compound. That's the compound, that's my finished coat. So the compound I'm going to be using to achieve this level 5 is that same lightweight compound. I don't like to mix up different types of compound. So what I've done, I've thinned down the joint compound, and I'm actually going to apply it with a roller. So you might say, well, how much water did you add? Well, it kind of varies based on the compound. But this is about the consistency that you want. If I were to pull this out of the bucket and would just all the drip right off, that would be too thin. And we don't want it too thin because it's messy. So I want it about this consistency right here. And what I do, I just work it out right down the ceiling, and then I work like a 3 foot by 8 foot area, like I said, and then I'm going to wipe it down. So I'm going to get started now. So I'm rolling out the compound in the direction of my seams. That's the way I like to apply it. And I'm not going right into the corners with this. I'm keeping out from the corner. That I will touch up myself with a taping knife later. Or if they're already third coated, I may not even have to get in there at all with any more compound. Okay, that's all I'm going to put on for right now. I'm not going to smooth this out. The reason I don't want to go any wider is because on my next run, I want to be able to have this seam on the center instead of right in the edge of where I'm removing it right now. And I'll explain that as I do it. But what I'm using is a 12-inch taping knife and a pan. So I'm just going to reach up and just remove that compound. I'm just removing it. But I'm unable to remove all of it. I'm actually leaving a thin film of glue compound on this ceiling. And that is what is evening out the textures in the porosity. I have a little advantage because I'm able to reach the ceiling from the ground. But if it was a higher ceiling, I would have a helper working with me. That person would be rolling it on, and I would either be on a ladder or on my stilts, wiping it down. But this is only an 8-foot ceiling, and I can reach it. I mentioned earlier that I like to apply the compound in the direction of the seams. Well, here I have a butted seam. So that goes the opposite direction of your longer seam. So I'm going to actually apply the compound in the other direction around that butted seam. By removing all the compound, I really have very little, if any, tool marks. And I do have a good cross-lighting here so I can really see well how much compound I'm leaving and how smooth I'm able to get it. When I'm done with this, there's going to be some touch-up sanding, but not a lot of major sanding left to do. I'm going to start the next run here, and I'm going to go wider than the seam. I'm going to go like a foot or so wider than that seam, so it's centered. Compound that I applied is already starting to dry. It's only been maybe 10 minutes. That's how thin it was, and of course the heat is on also. But and you can see the ceiling is now very white because I've left a thin layer of joint compound on the ceiling. You can no longer see the bare drywall. Everything is kind of an equal texture and an equal porosity. And maybe you probably won't be able to see this on camera, but there is a slight tool mark right here. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of sanding after when this dries, but it's going to be very minimal sanding. I'm just going to kind of brush over the ceiling with a 220 grit sandpaper, probably to sand this entire surface of this 22 by 26 ceiling will take me maybe 10 minutes. So applying the compound did take a little bit of time, but I'm able to achieve that high level of finish, and I really reduced the amount of sanding I'm going to have to do in the long run. So I'm going to easily meet my customers' expectations.